So this is a kind of spur of the moment video. I was gonna do a video on how Rainbow Six Siege and Counter-Strike could influence Breakout in Halo 6, because as much as it's not that popular now, I reckon with a fair bit of tweaking it could become really popular in its next iteration, Breakout 3.0 I guess now, because Breakout 2.0 already sort of exists. And while I was recording the gameplay, I came across something a little ridiculous. There's a map called Altitude 2.0. And in that map, at each side where the players jump into the map from their spawn, there is just a hole that you can fall into. I'm not talking about the little lava-y bit that you can sort of understand. There is literally a hole. And in a 3v4 clutch situation, 1v1 in the last round, we both got 4 rounds. I was down to 1v1, the flag was right next to their base. I just killed the flag carrier moments before he was about to cap the flag. And I was walking over to pick the flag up and head back, keeping my crosshair towards mid because I knew the enemy was around the mid towards my spawn area and thought he might come and stop me. And I walked backwards off the map. I did post this video on both YouTube and my Twitter, and if you haven't seen it, I'll play a clip now. And this clip leads us perfectly onto the topic of this video, Breakout's level design. Some of the do's and don'ts I think Breakout needs in order to be successful in its next iteration. Or this iteration if 343 decide to actually update it. Now, I'm not going to go through each map individually because, well, that would take an awful long time and there's a fair amount that I want to cover. But I will be going through some of the sort of rules, the sort of do's and don'ts that should be looked at and worked with when building maps for Breakout. Now the first one, as I'm sure you've probably guessed from what I've shown already, is making it so that you can't easily walk off places. In Breakout, to me at least, it's a very tactical game mode. There's a lot of sort of keeping an eye on angles and getting the first shot in is pretty important, even though the time to kill is pretty long compared to something like Rainbow Six Siege or Counter-Strike. Getting the first shot off on somebody can make all the difference between killing them or being killed by them. And in a game mode where you have 1 life per round, that's important. So, at least I personally walk backwards a lot. If I'm checking an angle or I know where someone is, and I'm walking somewhere else, I'll walk backwards and I'll keep my eye on where they should be coming from. It's one of those things when you learn the map, you know where players go, where players don't really go. And if you're looking there, which is, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of gameplay, you know, keeping an eye on enemies and being prepared to fight them, you shouldn't be able to just walk off the map. Especially in an area that's should be safe, really. It's a spawn area. It's where you run and jump into the map. It doesn't make a great deal of sense, and they could easily remedy this with a one-way shield door or something like that. It still fits the aesthetic of the map, but doesn't ruin the gameplay and cause things like what happened to me to happen. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, falling to your death is a bad thing. It can be used, like the lava on the same map on Altitude 2.0, I'll say is pretty good. It makes a skill jump have a bit more of a risk-reward to it. If you can make the skill jump, then well done. If you don't make the skill jump, then you die. But you can't just walk into that lava. There's a little ledge on one side, and well, you're making a skill jump from another. If you're looking backwards while you're jumping over that, there's not really much to look at. There's a wall. So that sort of thing I don't mind. But when you're looking for an enemy and you can just walk off a level, I think that's something that just needs to be changed. Another thing I'd like to see in Breakout maps, if they were to update and change them, is the focus on more angles and holding. Perhaps make it an asymmetrical game mode where one team attacks and one team defends. I know this is done in Siege and Counter-Strike and things like that, but as I say every time I reference them, there is a reason that Counter-Strike is the king of first-person shooting esports. And there's a reason that Siege is regarded as such a tactical shooter. Being symmetrical isn't that important in a game mode to require skill, so long as each team gets a chance at both sides. I guess it is symmetrical in that sense, so long as each team gets a chance at playing both the attacker and defender role. So we could have this as something like Assault. Now I'd like to see Assault Breakout. I think that could be really interesting. I'd like to see how an asymmetrical game mode fits within Breakout and whether there'd need to be any changes. But for me it'd be a nice change. I know this is game modes, not maps, but the map design sort of ties into it. The maps as well at this point, with an asymmetrical game mode, the maps wouldn't need to be symmetrical either. That's one thing I dislike about the Breakout maps. They all feel very boring. Very, well, symmetrical. They may not be symmetrical left to right, but from your base to the enemy base, the maps are 100% symmetrical. And while I know some people prefer symmetrical maps because it means that you don't have to learn it twice, one from one side and one from another, but it takes away a lot of the freedom and creativity that could be put into the map design. And the community could make some awesome Breakout maps. There are some awesome forges out there. But why would anybody really make a Breakout map other than the little custom games like Mantis Breakout and things like that? Why would anybody make a competitive Breakout map if it has to be symmetrical and they know that 343 aren't going to use it? Because at this point I don't think Breakout's going to get another update. It's had its big update for the game, and if they change it again I'll be happy but surprised. But it would be nice to see some asymmetrical Breakout. It wouldn't even have to be Assault. They could still use CTF for Breakout. I mean, I would love to see a standard CTF version of Breakout. Say a normal CTF where it's one cap to win, but you have one life per round. Not neutral flag. Especially not neutral flag where you take it back to your own base. I mean, I've talked about it in my Breakout update video, but frankly I think that idea is stupid. Also, please remove the shotguns from Breakout. The SMG was way better. But back to the map design. It would be nice to see the maps take on a more tactical feel. Because at the moment they just seem like Halo maps, but with the really boring blue texture everywhere. It would be nice to see less vertical maps with more options for players to take and more diverse objectives rather than just run to the middle of the map, get the flag and bring it back to your own base. I think there's so much untapped potential in the level design and the gameplay design of the game mode that I would love to see implemented in Breakout 3.0 or Breakout 2.5 or whatever they end up calling the next Breakout. Now I mentioned the textures. This is something I really hate about Breakout. You don't need your map to be really single coloured. There is so much of that blue texture on Breakout maps that it really irks me. The maps are not enjoyable to look at. And who wants to play maps that aren't nice to look at? I mean, look at Siege, look at Counter-Strike, the games that Breakout is trying to resemble, or at least taking inspiration from. They don't use just boring levels with one single colour and maybe an accent colour. They have nice environments, things that are actually nice to look at. And it's a shame that Breakout doesn't follow suit, because I think they could make some really nice Breakout maps. some really nice actual levels that play the way Breakout does, but don't look as uninteresting. Also, as a side note, Breakout maps are really easy to get lost on, to me. The new ones, at least. The old ones were nice. You could see across the maps, you had nice lines of sight. But especially on maps like Altitude, the first thing you see when you jump over is a ramp. You don't know what's on the other side of that ramp. You don't know what's on top of that ramp. But all you can see is a ramp. If it's your first time playing the level, you have no idea. That was my first time playing Altitude 2.0 in this gameplay that you've been watching. And I had no idea. I had to pick my own path. Most of the team went one way, and I was like, well, there's a path this way and nobody else has taken it. I guess I'll see what's up there. And I guess from my Breakout gameplays, you guys will probably have noticed that I like to go left when playing Breakout. I don't know why that is. I just tend to go left. Sometimes it's right, but from the first match on that map that I play, the left path is generally the path I will take, regardless whether it's left or right, on that map for the rest of my playing that map. It's just one of those weird things that from Counter-Strike I enjoy playing the same position over and over again and gradually getting better and learning players' tricks and nuances for that one position. Which is something that really annoyed me when they changed up the Breakout maps, because I then had to re-go through and pick new positions and new strategies and things like that. I'm not saying that map change-ups are bad, but I am saying that keeping them familiar is a good thing. And as much as these maps are all quote-unquote tweaks of the original maps, I don't recall Altitude ever being like Altitude 2.0. That might just be me. I may not have played a great deal of Altitude 1.0, but the maps feel a bit over-designed. Now my last point is just going to be a small one, and it's one that I've talked about before, especially with Halo 5, but it's the forced verticality. Now this gameplay was Altitude, so, you know, the map is designed to be vertical and that's sort of its gimmick. But if you're building a vertical map, please, 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 343, or whoever, no matter what game you're doing, if it's got something like a grav lift, make sure it works every time. The grav lifts in Altitude 2.0 don't work half the time, and it's a pain. It sucks. If you're stuck bouncing up and down on a grav lift in a competitive game mode, you need to rework something. Now I know this is more of a problem with grav lifts in general, because in Halo 5 they're pretty bad. Just sort of as a general rule. I mean, completely besides the point, in Warzone vehicles get absolutely destroyed by grav lifts. And players do too, every now and again. If you get a vehicle in a grav lift and it gets stuck, you fall out of that vehicle, you're gonna die. And I mean, that's just a case of how poor the physics system in Halo 5 is to begin with, but that's a different story. But verticality shouldn't be needed in something like this. I know I've said it a million times, and I'm just reiterating myself at this point, but it makes sense to mention it in a map design video. It makes sense to make your maps more tactical. Just because your game has ground pound does not mean you need to make the maps ridiculously vertical. The maps should be designed not just for the gameplay, for the tactics, for the strategy. Make it so the players can forge their own way through the map, rather than just following your preset paths and doing what you want them to. Don't have such control, because once you take so much control over the game, the creativity of the players becomes diminished. And I don't mean like forging and things like that, I mean creative gameplay situations. Look at CSGO, look at the crazy things people do, like on Mirage, people jump AWPing into apartments and getting crazy headshots in pro games and things like that.
Shots we saw falling in this spot before, the same spot, but with much more utility to work with. Here he comes once again. The first base is Adren. He's going to hit the ground there as Cold. Oh, what? A jumping double from Cold. What is going on right now? How does he do this? Cold has saved Luminosity with the your play. Unthinkable scenes there on the B apartments.
Those sorts of things don't really happen in Halo because there's not that much freedom. Now that may be more of a mechanical thing than a map design thing, but map design plays a key role. And if they want Breakout to be a success, I really think they need to go back and redo everything from the ground up. The map design at the moment, in my opinion, is a bit naff. I haven't really played that much Breakout 2.0 because my love for the game mode since Breakout 1.0 has been lost. The maps feel cluttered and overcomplicated. The gameplay feels more unrefined than it did before. It felt more like standard arena mode but with one life. And I think it's a shame because Breakout was something special. I didn't have that many qualms with the map design in Breakout 1.0. I thought, sure, there could be some things to be tweaked, but overall I thought it was pretty good. I'm not everyone, I'm just me. But, you know, the one person's opinion matters too. It's fine if 99% of the people who played Breakout said, oh, it sucked, you know, and Breakout 2.0 is great, then fair enough. But there are a lot of people like me out there who think that Breakout 2.0's gameplay and level design was a step backwards instead of a step forwards. And that's a shame. Thank you very much for watching. I know this has been quite a long one, but if you enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like or a comment. If you've got any thoughts on Breakout map design, let me know in the comment section below. And remember, stay classy.